In Disney castles, princesses dream of finding a prince. In Solomon's palace, 1,000 women had already found one, and they all lived with him. 700 wives, 300 concubines. Egyptians, Moabites, Ammonites, Sidonians. Each brought her gods, her culture, her demands, and Solomon built separate houses for some of them. But the women were just the beginning. There was a hall with 45 cedar columns imported from Lebanon, another with a throne guarded by 14 lions of solid gold, another where 500 shields hung, all pure gold, never to be used in war. And there was so much gold left over that silver lost all value. The Bible literally says silver was as common as stones in Jerusalem's streets. Now think about this. Disney castles were built to look rich. Solomon's palace was built with such absurd wealth that historians still debate if it's an exaggeration. But it's not. In this video, you'll discover what it was like to live in the most opulent place in antiquity. You'll understand how 1,000 women coexisted under one roof. You'll see how much gold entered the king's coffers each year. And you'll discover what happens when you have everything and still want more. Solomon built God's house in 7 years. His own took nearly twice as long. The Bible doesn't hide this. 1 Kings chapter 7 begins by saying Solomon built his own house for 13 years. 13. While the temple, that sacred place where God's presence would dwell, was finished in 7. Seems strange, doesn't it? The wisest man in the world spending more time on his own house than on the Creator's. But when you discover its size, you begin to understand. It wasn't a house, it was a complex. Several connected structures, each with its function. There was the house of the forest of Lebanon. There was the hall of pillars. There was the hall of the throne. There was the royal residence where Solomon lived. And there was even a separate house, special, just for Pharaoh's daughter from Egypt, one of his wives, all surrounded by enormous courtyards. Now think about the work this took. The stones used in the foundation were 3.5, 4.5 meters long. They weren't pebbles. They were gigantic blocks that needed to be cut precisely, taken from quarries, transported, fitted, each stone cut to measure, each face smoothed. And it wasn't just stone. Between the rows of blocks, they placed cedar beams imported from Lebanon. 3 rows of stone, 1 row of cedar. 3 rows of stone, 1 row of cedar. Like this throughout the structure. Why so much work? Why so much time? Because Solomon wasn't building a place to live. He was building a symbol, a message to all the kings around. When you entered there, you should feel the weight. You should know that this man controlled resources you couldn't dream of having. And it worked. Kings from distant nations came to visit. They brought gifts. They made alliances. They looked at those walls and thought twice before declaring war. Because if a man can move stones that size, imagine the army he has. 13 years, nearly 5,000 days of work. Masons cutting blocks, carpenters carving cedar, architects calculating every measure. And in the end, when everything was ready, Solomon had in his hands the most impressive palace in the known world. But the stones were just the beginning. Because what Solomon put inside the largest of these buildings would make any other king give up competing. Solomon built a forest where no trees existed. Jerusalem sits in the middle of dry hills. The climate is arid. Cedar doesn't grow there. But when you entered the largest structure of the palace complex, you found yourself surrounded by cedar columns from Lebanon rising to the ceiling, 45 columns. The Bible calls this place the house of the forest of Lebanon. And when you see the measurements, you understand why. 44 meters long, 22 meters wide, 13.5 meters high. It wasn't a hall. It was an entire territory under one roof. The columns were arranged in 3 rows, 15 columns in each row, and on these columns, cedar beams supported the roof. All of that had been cut in the mountains of Lebanon, transported for hundreds of kilometers, brought to Jerusalem, and raised there as if growing from the ground. 3 rows of windows on each side, square windows perfectly aligned, facing each other. Light entered from both sides and crossed the entire hall. All the doors were also square. Everything measured, everything fitted, nothing out of place. But what was all that for? At first glance, you'd think it was just a reception hall, a place to impress visitors. And it was. But it had another function. The house of the forest of Lebanon was the royal arsenal, Solomon's weapons depot. But they weren't common weapons. The book of 1 Kings, chapter 10, details what was stored there. 200 large shields, each made with 600 shekels of hammered gold. 300 smaller shields, each with 3 minas of gold. They weren't bronze shields. They weren't iron. They were pure gold. Can you imagine the weight? A gold shield doesn't work for war. It's too heavy. It doesn't protect better than bronze. But it serves one thing, showing you have so much gold left over that you can waste it on objects that will never be used in combat. 500 gold shields hanging on cedar walls. Light entering through square windows and hitting that metal. The shine reflecting between the columns. It was pure intimidation. When a foreign king entered there, he saw the world's most expensive wood supporting the roof. He saw perfectly symmetrical windows. He saw 500 shields worth more than entire armies. And he understood the message. Don't mess with this man. The house of the forest of Lebanon was a declaration of war that never needed to be declared. But that hall was where Solomon stored weapons. His real power was elsewhere, at the end of 6 steps that no one climbed without trembling. Why does a throne need 14 gold lions? Solomon had a specific place to judge. The Bible calls it the Hall of the Throne. It was also called the Hall of Judgment, lined with cedar from floor to ceiling beams. Noble wood smell impregnated in the walls. Heavy silence. Because there the decisions that changed lives happened. And in the center of that hall rose something no other kingdom managed to copy. Solomon's throne. It wasn't a common seat. The base was ivory, but it didn't stay that way. All that ivory was covered with refined gold. Pure gold worked over every inch of the surface. The backrest at the top was rounded. On each side of the seat was an armrest, and next to each of these armrests, a gold lion. 2 lions. But it didn't end there. The throne had 6 steps, and on each step, at both ends, another lion. 12 lions. 6 steps. 14 lions in total, if you count the 2 on the seat. The Bible is clear. Never was the like made in any kingdom. Think about what this means. Kings from around the world tried to show power through their thrones. They used gold. They used precious stones. They hired the best craftsmen. But no one managed to make something that came close to Solomon's throne. And there was a reason. When you entered that room to be judged, you didn't see the king right away. You saw 6 steps, you saw 14 gold lions looking at you, you saw that enormous structure shining, raising Solomon far above ground level. And before he even opened his mouth, you already knew. This man decides your fate. And he decided. There's a famous case recorded in 1 Kings, chapter 3. 2 women went to Solomon. Both had given birth, but one of the children died during the night. Each woman said the living baby was hers. There was no witness. There was no proof. Just one's word against the other's. Solomon asked for a sword. He ordered the living baby cut in half and half given to each. The true mother screamed immediately, "No, give the baby to her, but don't kill the child." The other agreed with the division, and that's how Solomon discovered who the real mother was. That judgment happened in that room. Before that throne, among those gold lions, the news spread throughout all Israel, and the biblical text says, "The people feared the king, because they saw there was divine wisdom in him to do justice." 6 steps, 14 lions, a man sitting high up, deciding between life and death. But not everyone who sought Solomon came to be judged. Some came from far away, just to see if what they said about him was true. And they brought gifts that filled that palace even more. Solomon needed to build a separate house just for one of his wives, because she was Pharaoh's daughter from Egypt, and he had 999 more. In antiquity, kings made alliances through marriages. It was political strategy. You marry a neighboring king's daughter. That kingdom doesn't attack you. You marry a princess from a distant nation. You gain access to their trade routes. That's how the game worked. Solomon played this game better than anyone else. The book of 1 Kings, chapter 11, leaves the number recorded: 700 wives who were princesses, 300 concubines, 1,000 women in total. It wasn't poetic exaggeration. It was an official list. Because each of these women represented an alliance. Each marriage was a signed peace treaty. Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, Hittites. Different nations, different cultures, different languages, all living in the same palace complex. The first was Pharaoh's daughter. 1 Kings, chapter 3, verse 1, tells that Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took his daughter as wife and brought her to Jerusalem, but she couldn't live in the same house as the others. She was the daughter of the most powerful man in the world at that time. She needed her own residence, separate, worthy of her position. So Solomon built a special house just for her. Of the 1,000 women, only one had her name recorded in Scripture: Naamah. She was an Ammonite, and the text mentions her for a specific reason. She was the mother of Rehoboam, the son who would inherit the throne after Solomon. The others? Anonymous. Princesses from 100 different nations, but nameless in history. Now, here comes the part the Bible doesn't hide. The text of 1 Kings, chapter 11, verse 2, says Solomon was joined to them in love. It wasn't just politics. He loved these women. He had real affection for them. It wasn't just a catalog of diplomatic alliances. It was emotional involvement. And that's what caused the problem. Because when you bring 1,000 women from 100 different nations, each brings her religion, her gods, her customs, and gradually, those practices begin to enter the palace. They begin to influence decisions. They begin to change the environment. The Moabite wives wanted to worship Chemosh. The Ammonites worshipped Molech. The Sidonians followed Ashtoreth. And Solomon, who loved these women, began to yield, began to allow, began to participate. The man who built God's temple was now building altars to foreign gods, and to support 1,000 women, to maintain alliances with 100 nations, to build separate houses and dedicated altars. Solomon needed an amount of wealth no king ever had, and he had it. There's a number in the Bible that appears in 2 places, 666. One is in Revelation, the other is in Solomon's bank account. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 14. The weight of gold that came to Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold. 666 talents. That's approximately 23,300 kilograms of gold per year, just from regular tributes, not counting what came in through trade, negotiations, diplomatic gifts. And it didn't stop there. All the kings of Arabia paid tribute to Solomon. The governors of the provinces, too. Traders and merchants brought gold and silver as tax to do business in Israelite territory. It was a constant flow entering the king's coffers. But the most impressive source came from far away. Solomon maintained a fleet of ships that traveled to a place called Ophir. No one knows exactly where Ophir was. Some say it was in Arabia. Others think it was in Africa. Some even speculate it could be in India. But one thing is certain. From there came 420 talents of gold at once, over 16 tons. And there was another fleet that sailed with the sailors of King Hiram of Tyre. These ships went to Tarshish. Every 3 years they returned loaded. Gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. 3 years of voyage, but the return was worth every day at sea. With so much gold coming in, silver's value plummeted. The Bible records this directly. The king made silver as common as stones in Jerusalem. Silver common as stones in the street. Nobody valued it. Nobody wanted it. Because when you have gold left over, silver becomes rubble. All the cups Solomon used for drinking were pure gold. All the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were gold. There was nothing silver. Because, in Solomon's days, silver had no value at all. Think about what this means. The metal other nations used to make coins, to pay armies, to close deals, in Jerusalem was disposable. Solomon had so much gold, he didn't even bother using silver. But with all this wealth came a choice. Solomon's foreign wives worshipped their own gods. And the king, perhaps to please them, perhaps because his heart was already divided, built altars to these gods. On the mount facing Jerusalem, he erected a high place for Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, another for Molech, the god of the Ammonites, and he followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, the man who received 666 talents of gold per year, who had silver left over in the streets, who possessed a palace unmatched in the entire world. This same man divided his heart between the God of Israel and the idols of foreign nations. And in the end, all that gold didn't buy what he needed most, a whole heart. Now click the video on screen to discover how Solomon's temple was built and what the workers' daily life was like on the construction site. The building techniques, click now on screen.